Good morning, welcome to episode number 211 of Learn with Lorna. This week we're looking at local worthies and colourful characters. My name is Lorna Steele-McGinn. I'm the Community Engagement Officer with the Highland Archive Service, which has 4 archive centres in the Highlands of Scotland, in Inverness, Fort William, Portree and Wick. This series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of events. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we really are grateful for that. So, as I say, welcome to episode number 211. This week pre-recorded as I am in Fort William with Rory for an event. But this week we're looking at a really interesting subject, local worthies and colourful characters. And I wanted to start with a look at the word worthies. If you're not in Scotland or perhaps not in the UK, I'd be really interested to hear your take on this word. Is it a word that you use within your communities to describe certain people? Collins Dictionary describes the word as worthy as a person of distinguished character, merit or importance. So as we would see, something being of worth. But it notes that it can often be used facetiously and that to describe someone as a worthy is often a bit facetious, but not always. When you have a look at the Dictionary of the Scots Language, the pre-1700 entry says, of persons, being a worthy means they are possessed of good qualities, specifically of high value as a soldier, brave, having the qualities of a knight, noble, honourable, of noble rank, of high moral worth or value, attracting honour, respect, and estimable. But it goes on to say, trustworthy, reliable, especially in business or in the standing of their community. So that's interesting. So worthy of standing within the community. But the post-1700 entry in the DSL, which I found really interesting, also includes the example of the phrase in one's ain wordy, in one's own self, at one's best. So I found that really interesting, that although it's a word that sometimes carries negative connotations if we describe someone as being a local worthy, I'm going to use it today to refer to all of those things, really, to people who are familiar faces or have been familiar faces in Highland communities and who are remembered as being part of our towns and villages' landscapes. And tying into that DSL sentence, people who are true to their own self, which I thought was really nice. So I'm going to start in Caithness with some notes written for me by my colleagues Anne and Jen. So we're going to start with Anne. Anne sent me this story about the Bard of Ray. Henry Henderson was born on a croft in Westerborriston, Ray, Caithness, on the 25th of July 1873. He was educated locally, and on leaving school, he helped his father on the family farm and with contract work in quarries. He was already interested in poetry, and by the age of 20 had collected over 300 books. In 1892, he sent his first poem to the John O'Groat Journal, and in 1895 won a local poetry competition for the laureateship of Caithness. It was at this point that he adopted his pen name, the Bard of Ray, and over the next 50 years had over 2,000 poems published in the John O'Groat Journal and other newspapers. Henry was a well-known contributor, submitting articles, verses and letters, along with his lifelong friend Donald Mackay, whose pen name was Jenny Horn, which is interesting, but not for today. For over 50 years, they would spark off each other, where the pen of the bard would dissect any article he did not agree with and put his own opinions forward. Many of his writings are in response to articles and poems appearing in the Northern Times newspaper. He also contributed regular articles on local history and issues, and was noted for his strongly held views, especially regarding crofting and land reform. His sympathies were often with the underdog, and he was not a one political party supporter, going wherever he felt it would do most good. The collection at Nucleus contains many letters written between Henry and Mr. Glass of Wick Library, discussing ideas, books and poetry, and Henry would often send him handwritten poems. He was married in 1906, and he and his wife Margaret had 9 children. In 1909, he was made sub-postmaster at Dounreay, a post that he held until his death. An active participant in many community activities, Henderson was the parish councillor in Ray and bard of the Thurso Jolly Beggars Burns Society before he died in 1957. So it's really interesting there, someone who is a character well known within the community, and there's something around that you see commonly across all these people around that voicing of opinions and around being such a well-kent face. Now, I mentioned there that the Bard of Ray, that his friend was the writer Donald Mackay, and he is someone who is also who's referred. Excuse me. I mentioned there his friend Donald Mackay, but someone else who is referenced throughout this collection is DGH from Greyhoundgate. And he seems to have been a literary rival of the Bard of Ray. But he wrote this poem when the Bard of Ray, Henry Henderson, died. And I loved it. And I thought, well, I'll just share one or two bits. And I thought, no, I'm going to share it all. This whole poem that really encapsulates maybe what it is to be a well-known and a very familiar person within a community. End of a joyous bard. The poor old bard is dead at last, there's grief in all the city. He didn't say goodbye or write a farewell ditty. We found a partly finished ode amongst his private papers, wedged in between two unpaid bills, the grocer's and the draper's. And so he's bade the world farewell and left us all the poorer. The tailors too, they'll mourn for him, of that there's nothing surer. The city bars won't seem the same, for there's no one to replace him. He's gone where critics cannot scoff, nor debt collectors chase him. 'Twas grand to see him in a bar, a picture of decorum, a look of wisdom on his face, a pot of beer before him. Monopolising all the talk, except when someone shouted, he never paid for one himself, and he made no bones about it. His politics were rather broad, his morals somewhat broader. He didn't hold with Parliament and queried law and order. He had a grudge against the force, he'd lift no hand to save them. They ran the post in one night, and he'd never quite forgave them. He was a socialist at heart, he called all men his brothers, excepting certain editors, his landlord, and some others. He held all critics in contempt, for in his own opinion, he equalled Masefield at his best and had the call on Binion. And now he's gone, the Lord knows where, and left us all behind him. I hope the angels treat him well, that is, if they can find him. I'm sorry that he wasn't spared to finish off his poem, but here he lies, a poet mourned by all who didn't know him. Isn't that brilliant? I really enjoyed reading through that, so I thought I would share the whole thing with you. I'm going to stay in Caithness, although I'm going to the other side of the county for our next local worthy, colourful character, person known to the community. And this is the hermit Tudor James. Love the name Tudor. And this is what Jen told me about him. Edward Francis Tudor James was a well-known character around Wick who lived in a hut on the north head of Wick Bay. He was from a line of well-to-do preachers in Wales, choosing to study for a music degree at Oxford University. While there, both his parents died, leaving him a large legacy which he chose to spend on travelling until 1890, when he decided to set up an organisation in Scarborough for fishermen to provide an alternative to public houses. He converted a house into a tea room and recreation hall where he provided concerts, showing his skill as an accomplished violinist, sold teas, and many of the visiting fishermen from Scotland would pass through. Although successful at first, it gradually ate up all his money, leading to his decision to come north to Wick. He arrived in Wick in 1908, and after having no luck finding a suitable house, he decided to live in an old gunpowder magazine, which he named The Cabin. Locally, he became known as Tudor James or Scarborough Jimmy. Every Sunday night, aside from the war years, he held a religious service in the open air near his hut for hundreds of visiting fishermen and fisher lassies, with hymns and psalms accompanied by the violin. On calm nights, the singing could be heard in the town. Every service began with the hymn Showers of Blessings, and of the many songs sung, many had a nautical theme. He was well known as a friend to the fishermen, and would spend most of the day greeting the passing ships and fishing boats as they went to sea. Tudor James would wave his flag and blow a trumpet, and in return they would blow their whistles or foghorns back. He did not like having his photograph taken, making the copy of a photograph that we hold at Nucleus quite rare. On the one occasion of having his photo taken without his permission, he asked to see the camera as it looked new and he hadn't seen one like it before. Upon it being given to him, he opened it up and removed the film and then gave the camera back. He had a vegetable garden beside his hut, and his family ensured that he didn't starve by providing groceries sent out from one of the local shops. The nearby housewives kept a good eye on him and on his pets, a cat, a dog, and 4 hens named after prominent politicians. Sadly, the poor conditions and dampness of his cramped house led to poor health in the last 3 years of his life, and he was taken to Laveran Poorhouse, where he died on Christmas Eve 1929 at the age of 75. He is buried in an unmarked pauper's grave in Wick Cemetery. An interaction with the poor relief system was part of life for many of the characters we're going to look at today. There's quite a lot of themes that come up. There's something around movement and itinerancy and travel. There's something around comment on politicians and local events. But also, for many of them, there has been some interaction with the poor relief system. And it's within the poor relief records for Contin parish in Rossshire that we find the story of Farquhar MacLennan, Farquhar of the Gun. Nicknames are also a commonality. All of these people, I think, just about have really interesting nicknames. So, Farquhar MacLennan was born in Strathconnan in the latter 18th century, belonging to a family of illicit whisky smugglers. The presence of excisemen resulted in the loss of the family business for the MacLennans, and in 1809, Farquhar decided to set out from home and lead the life of a wanderer. Much of Farquhar's wanderings were centred around the shores of the Bewley Firth. He became a well-known face in the locality as a character of great wit, if also seen by many as a fool. He was a performer who people paid to hear his renditions of Gaelic prayers. He was also known for getting up to mischief and being a trickster. His preference to wear a colourful collection of rags and a bonnet with feathers made him quite the enigmatic personality, with the nickname Farquhar of the Gun, owing to the homemade 6-barrelled gun that he carried, along with several pistols and even a sword. Utterly unusual in this country to do any of those things. An entry in the Contin Poor Register, dated the 27th of February 1867, refers to Farquhar's stubborn refusal to accept poor relief. Although he lived the life of a tramp, he always denied that he was poor. A local landowner once gifted Farquhar a £1 note, and people teased him for finally accepting poor relief, so he returned to the house of the gentleman and allegedly said, "Do you think, sir, would it be right of me, who am able to carry 100 weight of iron from Fortrose by Bewley to Inverness, to take poor relief? I'll do no such thing." The Rossshire Wanderer, as he was also known, died on the 21st of September 1868 at the Northern Infirmary. He had quite grudgingly refused to attend hospital when showing signs of frailty and was removed to the infirmary by cart. His dying request of being buried in Strathconnan was overlooked, and he instead was interred in Tomnahurich Cemetery in Inverness. We are very fortunate that a local studio asked Farquhar to sit for a photo in his latter years, and it is said to be with great difficulty that they got the wanderer to sit still long enough for the picture to be taken. And it's a really striking picture. Some of you may have seen it on our Facebook page, but I'll reshare it again after this episode so you can see it. And there are wonderful images of some of the characters I'm talking about today. We've got some brilliant pictures on Ambala of the people who have lived in our towns and villages over the years. Particularly, Ambala has a collection of sketches and illustrations from John Sinclair's Scenes and Stories from the North of Scotland, and also photographs from the Joseph Cook collection, which are full of images of people whose faces have a huge amount of character in them. Now, these two collections include pictures of people such as Johnny Moosey. You'll know me now after all these years. I love a good name and I love a nickname. And so there are people including Johnny Moosey or John Henderson. His other nicknames included Glossy, Starny, buck teeth and rotten legs. And he is described as being a generally useful person who served as a church officer, gravedigger, town crier and messenger, amongst other things, in Caithness. There is a brilliant picture on Ambala of Davy Blow. And Davy Blow was from Tain. Again, a picture filled with character, face with a pipe sticking out the corner of his mouth. Again, I'll share some of these so you can see them. And there's a picture on Ambala of Dunk Culloden, Duncan Forbes, who, after working as a hemp heckler in Inverness, went to America in the mid-1800s. He came home just a few years later to spend the rest of his life as a familiar face on Inverness's streets, working as a busher, delivering local goods and helping out at the blacksmiths while telling possibly tall tales about his antecedents and his connections to the aristocracy, because of course Duncan Forbes of Culloden, several Duncan Forbes of Culloden, important characters in Highland history. And I love the fact that he got nicknamed Dunk Culloden as reference to that. And I find it really interesting how long we have retained an interest in these characters, and we've almost romanticised the idea of old Worthies, of these characters that inhabited and do inhabit still our streets. There's a fantastic book produced in 2023 by Inverness Local History Forum, and it features some of those we've been talking about, and it focuses on Inverness and thereabouts, characters, Worthies, well-known faces, people who are of significance to the community. So books like that are still being produced about these people. And if we have a quick look at the British Newspaper Archive website, we can see that this interest in the characters that we've had in our communities goes back a long way. So there are obituaries for some of them, as well as articles looking at their lives, looking back over their lives decades after they've died, but decades ago from us now. So for instance, this article was published in 1903 in the Highland News about Dunk Culloden and another local personality, Dola Young. And it's a long article and I won't read it all, but the section on Dunk Culloden starts: "To old Invernessians everywhere, the very mention of the name Dunk Culloden will revive vivid memories of the past and will doubtless recall the old-time figure of a well-known street character. In a moment, from out of the past, there will be in imagination appearing before them a stout, sturdily built Highlander of the old school, who, although not clothed in the garb of his ancestors, dons an indispensable tam o' shanter with a huge tassel, a veritable danger signal, heavy-featured, Dutch-built, strong as Hercules, rough and ready in speech. Dunk was no ordinary street loafer. Indeed, in his time, there were few better-known men in the Highland capital than Dunk Culloden." And it's a long article, but it goes on to say, "Dunk, although not possessed of even a fair modicum of this world's gear," so he's not wealthy, "claimed to be of aristocratic lineage. Whatever may have been his right to claim connection with the upper crust, we know not, but he certainly resembled the aristocracy in so far that he toiled not, neither did he spin. At any rate, he had no fixed employment, preferring rather to earn a livelihood by what to this day is known as bushing, and it's only right to say that amongst those who employed him in this capacity, he was looked upon as the most reliable in Clachnacudden." So again, I found it interesting just how long we've retained an interest in those people who have played a part in our communities. His obituary, Dunk Culloden's obituary, published at the time of his death in 1874, is entitled "Death of a Character." And it's in reminiscences published in newspapers that we find our biggest collection at the Highland Archive Centre of stories of local Worthies. And they are in the papers of who else? It was always going to be either the Fraser Titlers or Meg McDougall when there's something that you go, I can rely on this collection to have something about this. And these are in the papers of Margaret McDougall. So let's have a look at some of those that she has gathered about local Worthies and colourful characters. So if we start with Jimmy and the Coachie, I told you there were some good nicknames. In city, town, village and countryside, every generation is entertained by the doings, generally combined with the sayings, of a character, mostly male, very occasionally female, sometimes but not always native to that area. Their idiosyncrasies earn for them an immunity from accepted conduct, and they very often engender an affection from those acquainted with them. Genuine simplicity appeals to pity, and most of us feel that we are due the character something for introducing a colourful thread into the tapestry of our everyday lives. It's a really nice way of thinking about it, that there's an element of appreciating somebody who brings something colourful and bright and different. Jimmy in the coachie will suit for a point of departure, for he had been a sailor by calling. Jimmy's seafaring ended when the bark in which he was serving was caught off the Rio Plate. He was literally blown off the foot rope of the fore lower topsail yard. I'm not a fisherman. With inevitable dire results to his frame. So he was in a shipping accident. He came to anchor for good at Clachnahary in Inverness, and there being no National Health Service in those days, he built his own invalid chair, a 3-wheeled box on wheels steered by a forward rudder. For propulsion, Jimmy in the coachie depended on anyone going his way, a simple proposition if townward bent, but not so easy when going back out. Parked by the riverside, he would bargain with the passing boys, a penny to shove the coachie to Clachnahary. The stretch of the North Road between Inverness and Clachnahary now carries its dozens of vehicles hourly to the whine of tyres revolving over smooth asphalt. In a quiet spell, maybe the ghostly echo of the creak of wheels and the soft pad of the barefooted engine made by the passing of Jimmy in the coachie may be heard by those whose memories are long and by those who have ears to hear. I really like the way that article's written. What about Neil Dahl, which is another character that Margaret McDougall collected some information about? Whatever Neil might have forgotten to put in his basket when he set out on his delivery round from a relative's greengrocery, he never omitted his most treasured and lucrative possession, a snuff box. Toddling down Castle Street with mixed greens for someone's kale pot, the handle of the basket crooked on his left arm, his right hand hovered over a waistcoat pocket, ready to produce the sneezing mull, I think it says, ready to produce, anyway, his snuff to anyone he thought might be interested in a sneeze. Yet, for all his simplicity, sorry, I just realised I've gone bright white. Yet, for all his simplicity, Neil was no philanthropist, for, lid closed and box returned to its lair, out shot the hand, open this time, ready to receive a penny or a halfpenny for services rendered. Humoured by grown-ups, life with the smaller fry was often an ordeal for Neil. Exasperated by the chivying of urchins down on the pavement would go the basket, no longer containing vegetables, but now ready ammunition. Turnips became round shot, peas became grape shot, and carrots streamed through the air like Congreve rockets. Having routed the enemy, Neil, like a prudent commander, recovered the missiles and continued on his way. Many a housewife who had ordered for mixed greens got what she asked for. Cappy Eppie is someone else who is described as a lover of the outdoors, wandering through the streets with her squeeze box, which apparently did not give forth music in the accepted sense, but the wheezing discord was fair enough accompaniment for the dance forming the principle of her act. A dance which was apparently no fandango due to her shapeless gown. Really cuts a picture of her with her squeeze box that doesn't have, is not really playing a tune, it's just making some air noises, and this dance that she's doing to entertain people. And the article about Cappy Eppie again finishes with a really nice paragraph. It says, "To her simple mind, every day was a good day, no matter where evenfall might find her, and so she danced and played to the amusement of some, bringing a tinge of sadness to the many, until the curtain fell." But I want to finish by looking at a character that many Invernessians will be familiar with, Forty Pockets. Although it's possible that several people went by the name of Forty Pockets, it is a name that absolutely lives long in Inverness, so people will, I'm sure, have an awareness of him. Harry Johnson, best known as Forty Pockets or the Railway Tramp, was born in Lincolnshire in the 1860s. He worked for a time on the railways, but then decided instead to lead a peripatetic life, walking the country via the railway lines, walking on the tracks, making his way to the area around Inverness where he would be based for the rest of his life, 20 years or so, from the 1920s to the 1940s. As I say, he always travelled on the tracks and often slept next to the railway lines as well. And Forty Pockets, as he was so called because of his habit of wearing multiple coats and jackets on top of each other, was by all accounts quite well respected, although he did get into trouble for frightening children who he said were tormenting him. And again, that's something we see across several of these people. But he was well known, he was well regarded by many of the community, and he would often get up and do a dance next to the street musicians. I wonder whether he did a dance next to Cappy Eppie, because she would have been about at the same time. And Forty Pockets died in 1942, but his name, as I say, is remembered by many, many people locally. So I hope that has been of interest, shared some of the stories. I could have gone on with all sorts of people, but I hope that has given you an insight into some of the people who have occupied our minds and hearts and communities over the centuries. I'll share some pictures of some of those that we have illustrations for after this episode goes out. If you're interested in finding out more, then I would really recommend having a look at Meg's collection, but also recommend buying the Inverness Local History Forum book around Inverness and thereabouts local worthies and characters. So next week, I hope you can join me. I will be looking at further stories from the Wick Society. And a reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. That High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of events. If you're able to donate towards our work, then we're really grateful for that. And I'll look forward to sharing more stories with you next week. I was just telling somebody just yesterday that about 90% of my job is spent telling stories in all sorts of different settings and with different people. So I'll look forward to sharing more stories with you next week. Thank you.